All right. Ready to go, Tom.
Well, thanks, Will, and thanks, everybody, for tuning in this week. And first, just want to take a moment and reflect on a colleague and a peer and a very good man that we lost last night in Elijah Cummings. Elijah Cummings, obviously was someone from the other side of the aisle that was a proud Democrat, as I'm a proud Republican, but really epitomized to me the definition of a statesman, a classy individual who we all looked up to, for those of us as members who look for that type of friendship and way to conduct themselves in the office of being a member of Congress. And so to many of us, the passing of Elijah is something that I think we both recognize on both sides of the aisle is a loss to the institution, is a loss to us as colleagues who knew him, and to his family, to his wife, who we've had the pleasure of testifying before us in the Social Security committee room, and to his entire family. We just send our thoughts, condolences, and want them to know that he was a very good man, and he served well here in the United States Congress. And so as we go forward, one of the things I wanted to highlight today before we get to questions is a bill that we're co-sponsoring on a bipartisan basis called the Jobs Act. That's a Jumpstart Our Business by Supporting Students Act that's being led in the Problem Solvers Caucus by, on the Republican side, Anthony Gonzalez, and Cedric Richmond on the Democratic side is leading this charge, and I'm glad to join with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for the Jobs Act, which essentially would allow Pell Grant dollars, which is a source of federal funding for advanced education, higher education in America for need-based individuals, to apply those Pell Grant dollars to workforce development programs that will allow for career technical education programs to be covered for the Pell Grant dollars. We've heard from across this country employers that have a difficult time finding employees to fill the needs in those skill sets that are covered by this career technical education type of program that we're expanding the Pell Grant program to. There's a recent survey out there that essentially says small businesses, 54% of them, could not find applicants qualified for the openings that they had within their businesses. We know the numbers of the unemployment status in America at an all-time low in regards to a 3.5% unemployment number that we should all be celebrating. But as we have that success, a problem that we face is that there are more job openings out there than there are Americans looking for those jobs. And so we have to make sure that the skills that are in those job openings match up with the skill set of the applicants that are out there to get those jobs. And so glad to support the expansion of the Pell Grants to those eligible career pathway programs that are covered by this definition of a career technical education. And to me, these are great jobs. These are jobs to be proud of. These are jobs that bring happiness to the folks that pursue them. And I am glad to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to open up that Pell Grant to these types of potential certifications and education status attainments that would come as a result of their completion of the program by these applicants. So why don't we now, let's open it up to questions and go from there.
Steve Brown. Steve, are you there? Greg Larson?
Yes, good afternoon, Tom.
Hey, good afternoon, Greg.
Oh, we'll start off with one of the big national stories going on. I know today a large bipartisan majority in the House voted overwhelmingly to condemn President Trump's decisions on Syria. I believe the vote was something like 354 to 60, and included 129 Republicans in the House that voted in favor of condemning the president on that situation. First, what was your vote on that situation, and your comments on that?
Yeah, so I oppose that resolution because, as I stated previously, when President Obama was in office and seeking to put boots on the ground in Syria, I did not see the mission there, and I did not support the boots on the ground in Syria at that time. And I'm glad to see our men and women coming home under this order. And also, let's be very clear. To those members who voted in support of this, to me, the political cowardice demonstrated by this was appalling because, you know, one of the things that has happened is that members of Congress are not doing their job in regards to authorizing the use of military force in these areas around the world like Syria. And what that's called is an authorization of use of military force here in D.C. resolution. I've called for that resolution when President Obama we had the famous red lines being put in the sand, and that we as members, Congress, should go on record whether or not we support the boots on the ground in Syria. And as those troops existed in Syria here recently until the president ordered their withdrawal, I see no legal basis that authorized those troops to be there. And so I'm glad to see our men and women coming home. And I'm also very glad to see the news out of Turkey and Syria today where we applaud peace. And now our men and women are safe, that we're engaged in that conflict, and we have security and peace in the area in regards to the violence that everyone was concerned about. So it's a complicated matter, but my first and foremost priority is to make sure that our men and women in the military are given a clear mission, and that we in Congress match up with the Commander-in-Chief in regards to authorizing that mission, and then when that mission is successfully completed, we get our men and women home back to their families in a safe and sound manner.
All right. I want to also turn your attention to a more regional event that's going on today in New York City. Governor Cuomo and three other governors from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Connecticut are hosting a regional summit on vaping and cannabis. Your thoughts on that?
You know, as we obviously are not aware of the actual summit, if you would, but on the general issues of vaping and cannabis, you know, I've been a Republican that supported medicinal marijuana use for years. I've also supported the financial bill here recently in the House that would address the issue of state marijuana business funds being utilized into the federal banking system. I think that makes sense. There's a lot of risk now because the banking system cannot accept those dollars, and you got a lot of cash flowing around. You got a lot of potential risks to people with those funds. And on the vaping issue, you know, I am concerned that when we talk about vaping, that it has serious medical consequences. And those consequences, as we've seen with unrelated but similar smoking deaths and illnesses, I'm concerned by the data that we see with the vaping, and I join in caution if that is the message coming out of this summit in regards to promoting and allowing widespread deployment and use of vaping products.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Terry Frank?
Yes, good afternoon, Tom.
Good afternoon, Terry.
I wanted to follow up on the situation in Syria. Vice President Pence and Mr. Pompeo having a press conference after meeting with President Erdogan and others. I'm hearing some scuttlebutt and some reports that have come out and said basically Pence and Pompeo were going over to clean up the president's mess. How do you respond to that?
No, what I see here is the president honoring his commitment to bring our men and women home safe and sound, removing them from long-term deployment entanglement in Syria. And as I previously stated under President Obama's administration, I do not support boots on the ground in Syria, and I'm glad now what we see here is peace. And to all these folks that are armchair quarterbacks as elected officials in here in D.C., I go, where were you years ago? Because you could have had a congressional vote, define the mission, authorize the mission, and then maybe our men and women could have been out of there much longer ago because there was unity between Congress and the White House. It's time for Congress to reclaim its responsibility and authority and vote on these matters and stand with the Commander-in-Chief in unity, or send the message that we don't support our men and women being put in harm's way. And so this is yet another example to me of how folks here use these situations for political posturing, but when it comes to the hard votes, they're the first ones to run away from putting their voting card in the box and putting their mouth where their voting card is and stand with their declaration that our men and women should be put in harm's way. Because as I interpret this vote yesterday, and anyone who supports it, they support military engagement with men and women of our military being put on the ground in Syria and engaging and risking their lives in that part of the world in perpetuity.
Well, you're talking about hypocrisy. I think it's that there are some reports that these troops that are being taken out of the border area are being redeployed elsewhere in the Middle East, possibly in Syria, and we have 2,000 troops going to Saudi Arabia. How do you balance the two?
Yeah, I call on that as the same issue. Now, when we talk about authorizing military force, we're talking about military engagement of being put in a hostile environment, so not all troops potentially in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere on bases where we have agreed upon presence and we have agreed upon diplomatic relationship in regards to their placement in the area to respond to hot spots as they go off. What I'm talking about is as you redeploy troops and put troops in harm's way in hostile areas and ask them to engage the enemy in a hostile manner, that I believe it's incumbent, wherever those troops are, that Congress does its job and go on record whether or not to authorize the use of that military force.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
Yep, thank you.
Amanda from Tappan the Greater Orleans.
Hi, Congressman. You have a number of colleges in your district, one specifically St. Bonaventure University. It's adjacent to the town of Allegheny. Allegheny has been concerned with problems related to student housing recently, and they actually enacted a 6-month moratorium that prevents landlords from converting single-family homes to multifamily homes. This has been a result of noise complaints and just general disagreements among the local community and university students. Are there any examples of constructive cooperation that you could point to, or just any recommendations you could give so that the community and the colleges can get along better?
Well, obviously we're very familiar with St. Bonaventure and proud to represent it here in Washington, D.C. And, obviously this issue is not just unique to St. Bonaventure. You have student housing issues across multiple institutions in the districts across the state and the nation, and what I encourage folks to do is this is primarily a local issue, come together, recognize the problem, and through partnership and discussion, figure out a way to meet this housing need. Now, at the federal level, we have been a long-term proponent of affordable housing initiatives that sometimes students could qualify for potentially, like the low-income housing tax credit, some of the other programs that are out there to allow for the restoration and renovation of these homes and facilities and structures, like the historic tax credit, the new markets tax credit, and we've seen those very effectively deployed in regards to public-private partnerships that they represent in regards to meet the housing needs of the local community. But overall, I think these are problems that a local community can solve best by staying in the room, recognize the need that the students have, recognize the need of the neighbor in regards to their right to a quiet and peaceful enjoyment of their property, and strike that balance in an open and constructive manner that is necessary to resolve this problem as well as a multitude of other problems that you have when you have the type of opportunities represented by an institution like St. Bonaventure University.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Catherine Loper. Catherine, are you there? Or anybody from WRVO? WROV?
Hi, yes. Congressman, can you hear me?
I am.
Hi, yes. This is Tom Magnarelli with WRVO.
Yeah. Hey, Tom.
Hey. So question for you. What are your thoughts on the Trump administration's decision to hold the G7 summit, I guess that would be next year's, at Trump's Miami Gulf Resort?
Well, obviously, the concern about profiting or anything of that nature needs to be transparently addressed and make sure there's appropriate accountability there. I do understand the security benefits that come from hosting the G7 there at that location, given that it's been a well-vetted, pre-established location that the President of the United States has visited multiple times. So a lot of the security concerns are well known, are well prepared for, given the lengthy use of that facility by the President of the United States, which means that bodes well to the security of the visiting dignitaries from around the world. So from a security perspective, I recognize that choice as a solid choice for a venue of that nature, but we have to make sure. I get the appearance of a conflict of interest, and so long as that profiting type of question has been transparently addressed, I'll leave it to the White House as to the final decision and their selection and the rationale for that selection for them to respond to.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that wraps it up.
Well, I'm here.
Oh, who's that?
It's Jerry Zuransky.
Hey, Jerry, we didn't see you there.
Oh, I'm here.
I thought you spoke up.
Oh, of course. I thought you were going in alphabetical order here. So
you're always used to that, right?
Oh, I'm used to that. Yes. I had a couple other Syria questions for you here.
Sure, go right ahead.
A lot of the members who voted for the resolution yesterday raised the issue of ISIS and said that without the U.S. troops there would be no guarantee that the ISIS prisoners that were there would not be freed, would not go on to cause trouble for the U.S. and other Western countries in the future. Don't you share that concern in any way? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so as I indicated last week when this question came up about Syria, that was my second priority. The first priority was making sure that our men and women that were put in that deployment were removed and withdrawn from that deployment in a safe and secure manner. And then the security and the securement of the ISIS threat that is there. I do believe in this, in the initial reports, and this is what we're going to look at closely, that as part of this ceasefire, there's been mutual agreement by the Turks, the Kurds, and our partners in that region of the world that are going to make sure that the ISIS threat that is there is contained and mitigated. And so I'm confident that there's mutual interest in making sure that ISIS threat is eradicated and nullified going forward.
Okay. Now, secondly, you've been using terms like political expediency and cowardice talking about this resolution. More than two-thirds of the Republicans in the House caucus voted for that. So are you talking about your Republican colleagues when you're saying that?
I'm talking about both Democrat and Republican colleagues because I have heard the rhetoric. I have seen the chest thumping firsthand in multiple meetings over the last 10 years almost being here in Congress. And when it comes to putting their voting card in the box and authorizing the use of military force, the same people that are so proud to condemn this decision of bringing our troops home and advocating for our troops to remain on Syrian soil were the same individuals that were speaking a different tune just a few years back under President Obama's administration. So I'm calling out both sides of that. It is, as Chris Cuomo had me on TV last night, hashtag Congress do its damn job. That means we need to go on record on these military engagements. And I'll tell you, I've talked to generals, admirals, and one of the things that I've repeatedly heard, and just heard it again this morning, Jerry, is that when Congress and the White House are not in alignment with each other on the missions that are being asked of our military men and women to do, that is a real problem in successfully completing that mission. And so if we have a mission in Syria to do, and we need our men and women to be put in harm's way, then the Commander-in-Chief needs to articulate, whoever that Commander-in-Chief may be, what the mission is, what does success look like, and when and how do we remove our men and women from that harm's way going forward. That is all I would ask, and I see our political folks here that are kind of leading this charge not willing to address that issue one iota. And, the problem I have, too, is when this comes up again, and it may have to come up again, when men and women have to be deployed in Syria or elsewhere because of unknowns that we can't see in the future, I mark my words, I am sure these same political elected officials that we saw yesterday who chastised the withdrawal of the troops will be the first ones to say our troops should not go in there. And that just cannot, that has to come to an end. Congress must do its job.
Would you oppose the president moving these troops to Saudi Arabia?
Now, obviously, Saudi Arabia is not a hostile war zone, as I see it, and the redeployment of those troops is into known, established relationships. So what I'm talking about is putting our men and women. Syria is a hostile area. Syria was obviously had multiple threats on a daily basis where our men and women were exposed to the risk of loss of their life or limb, and that is where I see the difference between the two.
Okay, great. Thank you much.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry.
Congressman Reed?
Congressman?
Congressman?
Yeah, Rick, okay.
Some of these troops that you're talking about have said that they were ashamed that the U.S. turned their back on the Kurds. Now the Kurds seem to have turned to Syria and Russia to keep them safe from the Turks. Is this region in a more dangerous state than it was before Trump's decision to remove the troops?
Well, I understand the concern expressed by folks about the Kurdish relationship and withdrawal of the troops and potentially their disappointment in that decision. I understand that. But my first and foremost priority is, in my mind, making sure that our men and women who are in the military, in harm's way, are kept safe and sound. And I am, as I've said before on the Syrian question, I believe having our men and women home is a good thing. And now as to the question of the security of the area, I think today's decision by the stakeholders, be it Turkey, the U.S., the Kurds, and other partners in the region, demonstrate that what we were able to do through diplomatic and economic potential sanctions is bring a peaceful resolution to this matter, and we should all be celebrating it. We as Democrats, we as Republicans and Democrats should be applauding the resolution today in that we have our men and women out of harm's way. We have a peace agreement, a ceasefire agreement that's going to lead to a long-term stability in the region, hopefully, in my opinion. And that should be something we all applaud. But I'm sure, given the political nature of what these issues have become, there are going to be elected officials, primarily on the other side of the aisle right now, that are going to somehow chastise the president for this decision, that is not going to recognize that this was a good day for America in regards to our men and women coming home, and now you have peace, potentially long-term, in that area of the world.
One other question, Congressman. Some associates of Rudy Giuliani's have been arrested and indicted just recently and campaign finance violations. Are you aware of your campaign receiving any contributions from any of these individuals that were associated with Giuliani?
As often asked about our campaign contributions, I have no idea off the top of my head. I have no idea. I don't keep track of that information off the top of my mind. But I don't believe that is the case. But it's all out there for public record.
Thank you.
Congressman Reed?
Who do we got?
Brian O'Neill? Congressman, is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Yep,
okay, sorry. Congressman Steve Scalise, his microphone was reportedly cut while he was asking a question about has the House been authorized to conduct an impeachment inquiry? There's been a lot of talk about that. There's also been a lot of talk about the way that Congressman Adam Schiff has been handling the hearings. Did you have any thoughts on those topics?
Yeah, what I saw when Steve was cut off and the issues that are being raised is that clearly the ability or the decision to have the impeachment process involve the minority party is something the majority party in the Democratic Speaker's office does not want to do. And by that, what I mean is impeachment inquiry vote would open up tools that would allow Republican members to subpoena evidence, bring in the kind of traditional fundamental fairness issues into light where you would have the ability to get to the facts and to, as a minority party, have the same level of investigative tools to present evidence on the theories that are being put out there as to the support or theories against going forward with impeachment. Now, I'm of the ilk, given what I've said before. I do not see a smoking gun piece of evidence that has been presented by the Democratic majority during this impeachment move that should require impeachable level offenses. These are high crimes. These are treason. These are crimes like treason that are subject to being put to death if committed by an American citizen. And what you see here is, I think, as I've been briefed on this issue, is the question of corruption being raised by the President of the United States about a former sitting vice president using his public office for potential personal gain for him or his family. And to me, I think that's a fair question. And I think the ability to get into that question is something the Democratic majority is deathly afraid to do. And so what you're seeing is them doing everything they can to prevent the minority party getting into evidentiary-based inquiries on that investigation of corruption.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else who didn't show up on my roll? All right, that wraps it up.
All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.